Hungarian Folk Tales. The pin, the dog, the crayfish, the egg and the cockerel. Once upon a time, a very long time ago, there was a little pin that was very bored in the sewing box. And the little pin thought it would go out and see the world. The pin walked and walked, and as it was walking along, it met a dog, and the dog said, "Where are you going, friend?" "Why, I'm going out to see the world." "Then I shall go with you too." "Please do." They walked and walked, and as they were walking, they met a crayfish. The crayfish said, "Where are you going to, friend?" "Why, I'm going out to see the world." "Then I shall go with you too." "Please do." They walked and walked, and they were walking along when they met a rotten egg. The egg said, "Where are you going, friend?" "Why, I'm going out to see the wide world." "Then I shall go with you too." "Please do." They walked and walked, and they were walking when they met a cockerel. The cockerel said, "Where are you going to, friend?" "Why, I'm going out to see the world." "Then I shall go too." "Please do." They walked and walked until they arrived in the back of beyond, and night began to fall around them and the sky grew dark. The four of them looked for a place to lay their heads for the night, but they found themselves in a vast forest and searched for a place to sleep. Then they caught sight of a cottage where they decided to go and ask for shelter. They walked into the cottage, but found that it was empty inside. "It doesn't matter that no one's at home, we can still sleep here for the night." And each found a place to lay its head. The pin stuck into a towel, the egg rolled into the ashes, the crayfish sat in the wash basin, the cockerel roosted on top of the fence, and the dog lay down on the shady porch. Then they all fell fast asleep because they were tired from all the walking they had done that day. The cottage was owned by 3 foxes that had gone down into the town to steal chickens from farms as the darkness descended. Now the 3 foxes came running home. As they ran, twigs cracked under their feet, and the cockerel heard them approaching and crowed a warning to its friends. The foxes stopped for a second when they heard the crowing, but then they ran quickly on. Then the dog took notice and began to bark. The foxes stopped again when they heard the dogs barking. What could be happening at the cottage, they thought. But then they carried quickly on. When the foxes arrived, the cockerel crowed, the dogs snapped at their heels, but they carried quickly on into the cottage. But a terrible surprise still awaited them. The father fox said to its son, "Quickly go and look for a coal in the ashes, that we can light a lamp and see what's happening in the cottage." One of the fox's sons went to the fireplace and sorted through the ashes. But the egg blew up in the fox's face, so it ran to the basin for water where the crayfish lay that pinched the fox hard. It tried and tried to shake the crayfish from its paw, It grabbed the towel to dry itself and the pin pricked it sharply. Run away! We need to run from this terrible place. And the foxes ran and ran and ran away and may still be running till this very day. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Diligent Girl and the Lazy Girl. Once upon a time, there lived an old man and an old woman, and each had a daughter from their previous marriage. The old woman was always angry with her husband's daughter and did not like her the slightest bit. Things went from bad to worse until one day the old woman chased the girl away from home, saying that she should seek work with a rich family. The girl walked and was walking past a pear tree when the tree spoke to her. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to find a job as a servant with a rich family," the young girl replied. "Come here and rid me of my dry branches, and I will do you a good deed in return." Then the young girl walked on her way until she passed a grapevine, and the vine spoke to her. "Come here and hoe around my roots, and I will do you a good deal in return." Then the young girl walked on her way until she passed a crumbling oven. "Please come here and make me tidy and clean, and I will do you a good deed in return." Then the young girl walked on her way until she came across a broken-down well. "Where are you going?" "I journey to find work. Please come here and make me tidy and clean, and I will do you a good deed in return." So the young girl did as she was bid and bailed the stale water out of the well and walked on her way until she met a tiny dog. And the dog said, "Please wash me, brush me and trim me, and I will do you a good deal in return." The young girl cleaned and trimmed the dog, and the dog thanked her, and she walked on her way until she saw a beautiful house. There were fairies living in the house. The fairies asked the purpose of her journey, and so the young girl told them. Then the fairies said, "Why don't you stay here and become our servant? There are 7 rooms. You have to sweep out 6 rooms every day, but you must never go to the 7th room." So the young girl worked for a year and a day, and at the end of the year, the young girl said, "I would like to leave now and go home to show my parents what I've earned." "You have been a faithful maid," the fairies said. "You did as you were told, so now we will tell you what you have earned. Come here and lie down atop these gold coins. Roll over, and whatever sticks to you is yours. And now go and roll over on the silver coins, and whatever sticks to you is yours." The girl did as she was told, then stood up and bid farewell to the fairies. On her way home, she came across the little dog again that said, "Come here and take as many pearls as you wish." The dog was covered in pearls, and the young girl took the pearls and hung them around her neck. She walked on her way until she reached the well again, where jugs hung so that people could drink from its sweet water. The young girl was thirsty, and so she took a drink and walked on her way. When she reached the oven again, she noticed it was filled with bread and cake, and the oven said, "Come here and eat your fill in return for your good deed." She ate as much as she could, packed more to take home, and then walked on her way. Next, she reached the grapevine that hung heavy with ripe fruit. So here the girl stopped and ate and drank as much as she could. Then the girl walked on her way again until she came to the pear tree, and the pear tree said, "I've been waiting for you, as all my pears are ripe." As the girl neared home, the cockerel crowed to announce her arrival. "Cock-a-doodle-doo! My mistress is coming home covered in silver and gold." The young girl heard the cockerel's call and ran home to bring joy at last to her old father. "Cock-a-doodle-doo! My mistress is coming home covered in silver and gold." The old woman shouted, "Be quiet! That's not true." Once again the cockerel said, "Cock-a-doodle-doo! My mistress is coming home covered in silver and gold." The old woman said, "You've earned very nicely indeed, but now my own daughter will go forth and work for a rich family, and she will earn a great deal more than you've managed." When the old woman's daughter reached the pear tree, it said, "Come here and rid me of my dry branches, and I will do you a good deal in return." The girl said, "I will not ruin my pretty white hands and my lovely tiny feet, no matter what happens." When the girl reached the grapevine, it asked her to hoe its roots and to expect a good deal in return. But once again, the girl refused to do anything that might ruin her pretty white hands and her lovely tiny feet, no matter what happened. Next, she reached the oven. The oven asked her to repair it, and it would do her a good deed in return. But the girl said she would not ruin her pretty white hands and her lovely tiny feet with disgusting mud and clay, no matter what happened. Next, she came to the broken-down well. "Please come here and make me tidy and clean." But again she refused to dirty her pretty white hands and her lovely tiny feet, no matter what happened. Then she met the little dog that said, "Come here and trim me." But she refused to touch the dog because she would not dirty her pretty white hands and her lovely tiny feet, no matter what happened. Next, she reached the beautiful big house and asked that she be allowed to sleep there for the night. The fairies living there asked her where she was going, and so she told them. In reply, they asked her to stay and work as their maid. They said, "Here there are 6 rooms, and you must sweep them every day, but you must never enter the 7th room." The girl did as she was told and swept the 6 rooms every day and ignored the 7th. But after a while, her curiosity forced her to open the door to the 7th room. To her horror, she saw that it was filled with frogs and snakes, and they bit her and stung her so terribly that by the time she managed to escape, she was covered in blood. And so she left the fairy's house with no payment at all. On her way home, she met the dog and went up to ask for some pearls. The dog said, "You refused to help me, and now I refuse to help you." The girl reached the well and was very thirsty, but was not allowed to drink. When she reached the oven, it was packed with fresh bread and cakes, but she could not eat any of them because when she reached inside for some, it burned her hands terribly. When she reached the grapevine, she tried to pick a bunch of grapes and to drink a glass of wine, but the grapevine pushed her hand away. And when she reached the pear tree, she could not pick a single pear. As she neared home, the cockerel caught sight of her and flew to the top of the fence and let it be known to everyone that, "Cock-a-doodle-doo, my mistress is coming all covered in blood." The old woman went to the fence and said, "That's not true, she's covered in gold." But the cockerel repeated, "Cock-a-doodle-doo, my mistress is coming all covered in blood." The old woman said, "That's not true, because she's covered in gold." The cockerel repeated, "Cock-a-doodle-doo, here comes my mistress all covered in blood." "That's not true, that's not true," shouted the old lady. But the old man said, "Now you can see that my daughter earned more as a maid than yours ever did." This led to such a quarrel that the old woman and her daughter left the old man's home. Then the old man and his daughter lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Magic Mill. Once upon a time, there lived a poor old man who had more children than there are holes in a sieve. His oxen were so small that they were barely any bigger than grasshoppers. The poor man and his wife spent all their days and nights worrying about how they would feed their very large family. One day, the poor man hitched his tiny 2 oxen to his tiny cart and went into the forest. The poor man was busy collecting dry branches and stacking them neatly on the back of his cart when he caught sight of a boy and a girl playing in a clearing close by, and the children began to talk to him. The poor man soon learned that the girl was the daughter of the king of the sunrise and the boy the son of the king of the sunset. As the 3 of them chatted away, the boy noticed the 2 tiny oxen. The little prince was so besotted with these miniature beasts that he begged the poor man to sell them to him. The young prince appealed and pleaded and promised the poor man that his father, the king, would reward him richly, and so the poor man eventually agreed. When the poor man arrived home without the oxen, there was an almighty argument, and his wife was so angry with her husband that he turned on his heels and left the house for the court of the king of the sunset. The poor man arrived to see the prince playing with the 2 tiny oxen. "Come, kind sir, come," said the prince, "and let me give you some advice. No matter what my father offers you, you should refuse it and insist that he gives you the magic mill in payment." So the poor man went to the king, who said, "Your 2 tiny oxen give my son such great joy and pleasure that you may have whatever you ask." Then the poor man noticed that the magic mill was on the table, and it was so very small that it looked like a child's toy. So the poor man said, "Your Majesty, the only thing I wish to have in return for my 2 tiny oxen is this tiny mill on your table." The king said, "Sir, you may have whatever you wish for, but not that." Now then, thought the poor man, this tiny mill isn't a toy after all, as the king does not want to part with it. The poor man humbly added, "Your Majesty, please let me have this tiny mill so that my children may also have a toy to play with." The king loved his own child very dearly, so he agreed to give the poor man the mill. Then the prince said, "Kind sir, you should leave for your home now, and when you arrive back, place the mill on the table and say, 'Magic mill, give me gold and food to eat.' And when the mill has made enough, you simply say, 'Magic mill, stop your magic now.'" The poor man was delighted with his prize. He then thanked the prince for his kindness, put the tiny mill under his arm, and hurried home so quickly that his feet never touched the ground. He was on his way home when he saw something large and black looming towards him, but he could not for the life of him guess what it was. And what do you think it was? It was a horrible, huge, black hat. Underneath the hat was a man, and the poor man joked with him and said, "Good day, good friend. Isn't that hat too tight for you?" The hatted man replied. "Instead of mocking me, sir, why don't you give me a bit of bread because I haven't eaten for 3 days straight?" The poor man said, "But I don't have any food with me either." But then he remembered the magic mill and said, "Magic mill, give me good food to eat." The poor man had barely finished speaking when so much food appeared that there was enough to feed a village for a week. "Magic mill, stop your magic now." Then the two men ate and talked a while until the hatted man said, "Good sir, your mill is a magical thing indeed, but my black hat also has spectacular powers. Ask for one of anything and it will give you 2 instead. I will trade my hat for your mill." "Sir, I'm not a fool." "That's what you think, just watch this," said the man in the hat. "Fire!" "Enough!" "Yes," said the poor man, "I see your hat is quite splendid, but a hat such as that would not save me from starvation." But the hatted man appealed and pleaded with the poor man until he eventually agreed to the exchange. When the hatted man walked away, he also left a stick lying on the ground. The poor man was left feeling cheated and sad when the stick suddenly spoke up and said, "Why so sad, master?" "I'm sad because I have lost the little sense I was born with, and I'm sad because I have lost my magic mill that I was foolish enough to swap for a hat." Then, in an instant, the stick hurried away and reappeared with the magic mill. And so the poor man had no reason to feel sad a moment longer. When the poor man returned home, his family surrounded him and rejoiced when they learned that the mill had magic powers. Days and months passed, and one day the poor man was standing at his gate when he saw the king approaching on foot with his wife and son. The poor man asked the king, "Where to, your majesty? Where are you walking on foot?" The king replied, "We're in very great trouble. The king of the north has invaded my kingdom, and I have been forced to flee my home with my beloved family. But don't be sad over such a little matter, your majesty. I will mend matters in no time at all." Then the poor man put the huge hat on his head, took the stick in his hand, and set off to find the king of the north's soldiers. It was not long before he stumbled across them because the king of the sunset's kingdom was crowded from border to border by the soldiers. Then the poor man climbed to the top of a hill, pointed his huge black hat in the direction of the enemy and commanded, "Hat, fire!" He then sent his stick after the men to beat their behinds to make them run faster still. The carnage was incredible, and not a single soldier of the King of the North survived to tell the tale of what had happened that day. Having destroyed the enemy, the poor man turned and made his way home, where he told the king what he had done and that he could return to the Sunset Kingdom. Then the king purchased the hat and the stick from the poor man and made his way back to his royal home. So now the Sunset Prince married the Sunrise Princess. They had a wonderful wedding, and the poor man led the dancing, and if his legs can stand it, he is still dancing to this very day. Hungarian Folk Tales. Pinko. Once upon a time, there lived an old woodcutter who was poorer than a mouse. One day the woodcutter said to his wife, "Wife of mine, please bake me 2 corn cakes that I can take them out to work with me so that I won't have to come home to eat." So the woodcutter's wife baked the cakes, put them in the woodcutter's bag, and he set off to work in the forest. Down in the forest lived old Paluto, and old Paluto had a young son called Pinko. Pinko listened keenly to the sound of the woodcutter's axe and watched the old woodcutter from the shadows. Then the crafty boy took the woodcutter's bag down and gobbled up both the corn cakes. But old Paluto got wind of what his son had done. "Where are you, Pinko?" old Paluto called out to his son. "Here I am, father." "Come quickly, where have you been?" "I have just gobbled up the old woodcutter's corn cakes." "As you felt no pity for the poor woodcutter, you will now have to serve for 3 long years in return. Do you understand?" This news saddened Pinko, but he agreed to do his father's bidding. So he turned on his heels and went back to the woodcutter. When he arrived, he said, "Woodcutter, I am the one who ate your corn cakes. So be happy, my child, and don't sound so sad. But it doesn't work like that because my father has punished me and told me that I should work as your servant for 3 long years. There is no need, my child, because I could never pay you, but I can earn my own living." And wonder of wonders, Pinko plucked the trees from the ground and knocked them together to make neat logs to be stacked. By the time night came, he had cleared the whole forest. "Can we go home now?" "Yes, but first I want to gather some sticks for the fire." Pinko set hard to work and gathered up so much firewood that even 20 oxen could not have carted it home. Then he lifted the poor woodcutter up and placed him on top of the pile. The very next day, the poor woodcutter went to the rich farmer to tell him that he had felled, cut and stacked all the wood for winter. The farmer was reluctant to believe him, and so he sent servants to see for themselves. They returned in the evening and informed him that the forest had been cleared and neatly stacked for winter. So the rich farmer was forced to pay the poor woodcutter. Then the woodcutter made his way home, where he and Pinko agreed that they should seek work with the Baron the very next day. "You came at the very best time," the Baron told them, "because the field I have to plough would take 100 men, a year and a day to complete." So the old man went to the market with Pinko, where they purchased 2 young calves and then went back to the field to plough it. There were very many men ploughing with a dozen oxen. So Pinko strode out to the middle of the field, and by noon he had already ploughed more than all the other men put together. The other workers were so impressed by Pinko's calves that they asked for what price he would gladly sell them. But Pinko was proud of the calves and asked for a sack of gold along with the 12 oxen. They bargained and bargained until the Baron agreed to pay Pinko's asking price. The sack of gold was measured out for him, he was given the 12 oxen, and then he was sent on his way. The Baron's men began to plough the land with the 2 calves, but however they pulled and pushed the tiny beasts, they would not work. They quickly reported the bad news to the Baron, who ordered them to search for Pinko and bring him back at once. The men soon caught Pinko. Then Pinko took the handle of the plough in one hand, cracked his whip with the other, and the calves began to plough as never before. "This is how you should do it," he told them, and he went home. Back at home, he and the woodcutter discussed where Pinko should next seek work, and they agreed that he should visit the king the very next day. "You came at the very best time," the king told them, "because the corn I have to thresh would take 100 men a year and a day to complete." They went to the barn that was piled to the rafters with corn to be threshed. But Pinko grabbed one stack and threshed it in no time at all. Then he took all the rest of the wheat, oats, millet and barley and threshed it all before the day was done. Then Pinko went to the king to tell him the corn was threshed. "Oh, but you shouldn't have done it like that." "Why, what did I do wrong? The wheat, the barley, the oats and the millet should be separate." "That's no matter. I shall sort them apart." And no sooner had he spoken than, wonder of wonders, the grain all stood in neat piles. "What payment do you ask for your hard work, son?" "Only 1 sack of wheat," Pinko said. "Very well, you may come and collect it whenever you wish." Pinko returned home, and he and the woodcutter gathered all the canvas they could find and spent a week sewing the sack. Now let's go and collect our payment. The next day they reported to the king, who ordered his bailiff to fill Pinko's sack with wheat in payment for his work. Then they went to the barn and began to fill the sack and shovel all the grain in that Pinko had threshed. But that was only enough to fill one small corner of the sack. So the farm bailiff went back to the king and told him the size of the sack that Pinko had sewn. The king said, "I have agreed, and so I shall pay, but he will never be able to take the big sack away with him." So the men continued to fill the sack with last year's grain and the grain from the year before, and the sack still was not full when they had used up wheat from the last 10 years. "What kind of king is this man who cannot pay me for an honest day's work?" Pinko complained to the bailiff. Then Pinko took the enormous sack and swung it over his shoulder, and he and the poor woodcutter left for home. They walked away without even saying goodbye, and when they got home, there was much celebration. Now they had grain, wood, oxen and gold, and could at last live a happy life. As the months turned to years, Pinko said to the woodcutter, "I have been with you now for 3 long years, so I will leave you in the morning." The woodcutter pleaded and appealed for him to stay, but Pinko left for home. And when Pinko got home, there was much celebration, and they all lived happily ever after. Hungarian Folk Tales. The Shepherd and the Snake. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there lived a poor shepherd boy. The only thing the shepherd boy possessed was a little donkey, and he spent his days guarding the mayor's flock of sheep. He sat watching the flock one day and thinking how unfair it was that some people had money and were rich, while others had none and were poor. He sat thinking and thinking when he suddenly heard the sound of crying. "Help me! Help me!" The boy followed the sound of crying and walked to a hole in the ground, where he came upon a yellow-bellied snake wriggling in a fire, "Help me, shepherd boy, and I will soon repay the favour." So the boy held out his stick, and the yellow-bellied snake slithered up it and out of the fiery flames. Then the snake said, "Follow me, and you should know that my father is the king of all snakes." The yellow-bellied snake slithered along, and the young shepherd walked quickly behind. He left his donkey to watch over the sheep. The boy followed the snake until they found themselves in a forest, where the yellow-bellied snake suddenly slithered under a flat stone. The snake shouted back, "Push the stone away and follow me." The young shepherd did as the snake had said and revealed steps going down into the ground. And he walked down and down and down until he arrived in a beautiful diamond meadow. "This is my father's palace." And the gate to the palace was guarded by two very large snakes. There the yellow-bellied snake slithered in, and the young shepherd followed close behind. They passed through one room after the other until they arrived at the throne room that sparkled with silver and gems. The walls were studded with diamonds, and everything was decorated in precious metal. The Snake King was sitting proudly on an enormous throne, and when he wanted to give his servants an order, he would simply flick his tail and bells would ring. Then the yellow-bellied snake hurried up to the king and embraced him. "Father dear, don't harm this poor shepherd boy because he saved me from the fire." "Now, young shepherd boy, you may choose from two things as your reward for saving my son. You can learn to speak to all the animals, or I can give you a bag of gold." The poor shepherd boy thought hard because he was sorely tempted by the promise of riches, but he would never ever have the chance to learn the language of the animals again. And so that is what he chose. "Come here, my child," said the Snake King. So the young shepherd boy approached the fearsome snake, and the king hissed in his ear, and he instantly understood what the king was saying to his snake son. So then the poor shepherd boy bid farewell to the yellow-bellied snake and his father the king, and started to walk back the way he had come. He walked on until he came to the beautiful meadow, climbed back up the underground steps, and re-emerged into his own world once more. Then he herded his sheep up and sat down to reflect on all that had happened to him that day. And as he sat there, two tiny birds flew up and landed in the top of a tree, where they sat talking to each other. Did you know? If that poor shepherd boy only knew what lies at the foot of this tree, he would not stay poor for one day more. But the young shepherd heard this and understood all they said. So he swiftly drove his sheep back to their owner, picked up his sharpest axe, and walked back to the forest to the tree where he had sat. And he dug until he discovered, to his great delight, a big pot of gold. As evening fell, he took the gold home and never had to watch the mare's sheep again. Then he soon bought a beautiful house with plenty of land, married his bride, and they both lived happily ever after.